Thank you. This is like my fourth or fifth access, so I'm trying to compete with Roy. So I'm going to do a Z3950 talk. It's got a good future. What I wanted to talk to you about is hopefully some of you have heard about some of the things that we've been doing with our Summon product at Serial Solutions. We've done a number of redesign projects on it over the past year now, and we've just recently launched it. And what I want to talk about is the research work that we did to come to the conclusions of how we decided to do some of the redesigns and address some of the usability issues that we uncovered. And really what has sparked a lot of this was some of the research out of the Project Information Literacy Group. Is everybody familiar with their work? Some? Okay. If you're not familiar with them, I encourage you to take a look at their reports. Some really great stuff. I've got a couple more slides that hit on some of the things that they're looking at. They kind of do an analysis of users, how they use libraries. They've been doing them kind of over time, looking at longitudinal, to kind of get some understanding as to how users are working with libraries over time and how that's changed. And I think this is probably the biggest thing that's really been echoing in my ear is that user experience has not really kept up with user expectations over time in library systems. And this has really created a big disconnect and has caused some of the issues that we've been dealt with in the past. We're not keeping up to date with user expectations, and they're changing so rapidly fast. So as a provider of a user experience to libraries, we need to meet those user expectations. Otherwise, our product is not going to meet its goals. And if you think about just over the past few years, we first provided our Discovery product in 2009, and the iPad hadn't even existed. So you can only imagine from the initial time that we designed our application, users weren't even using really touch-based computing at that time as a primary device. So just the way users interact with technology has changed dramatically in just a short period of time. And really, the big impetus to change, from my perspective, is Google. Because we're providing a search solution, Google is really kind of the standard, the de facto, the way kind of users work with us every day, and it's really kind of helped shape their expectations about how search works, about how the web works. And they have changed so much in the past 2 years than they have in the past decade since they've started. Over the past 2 years, they've completely redesigned all their properties to have common navigation, have common look and feel, have a tremendous amount of white space. They introduced the instant search so that Google, is providing results as you're typing, almost telepathically. And they've introduced the knowledge graph, which really helps change the way discovery and search is being used. It's more than just a set of search results now. Now it's being able to provide context to the user about their search. One of the big things that I've taken to heart from the work that Google has done, it was a title of their blog post, is that they've kind of moved to a mantra of things, not strings. So kind of being more of looking at looking at content contextually, rather than just here's a whole bunch of stuff, good luck. So what we did is we decided that in 2012 that we were going to set out and do a whole new set of usability testing. And look at how users were working with the product and how they were working with our search system. Granted that it had now been about 4 years old at that point, and when we first designed our interface, which was now becoming 5 years old, we had designed the interface in 2008. We weren't working off of user experience of discovery because it was a brand new concept. So we were working off of how users worked with databases, how users worked with web searching, that sort of stuff. But now we actually had data about how users are working with, how they're working with discovery tools. And so we've been able to collect some of that data and help drive that into a redesign. We decided that we wanted to do a redesign because our interface was 5 years old. And so we wanted to begin to start to address some of the usability issues that we had been seeing. So we did kind of a baseline study. Rather than testing individual components, we actually did a baseline study. Let's look at the entire experience and see how users are working with the product and how it's impacting what they're doing. And look at the complete experience to get an understanding. So we started to do that. We also looked at some of the research that's out there as well. So this is some of the findings about the millennial generation, which we're on the tail end of currently at university today. But these are some of the common characteristics. If anybody's looked at some of the research done by them about the millennial generation, this isn't much of a surprise to you. They want to be self-sufficient. They want to be anonymous. They want to work on their own. They don't want to ask for help. They don't want to work, with others outside of their comfort zone. They kind of want to work either by themselves or with their groups and be able to do everything on their own. Be very self-sufficient, I think, is the key there. Also, some other trends as well is there's a huge push to mobile computing as well, which is impacting this cohort of users. They're growing up with these devices. A few anecdotes I think is interesting. Lenovo announced. Lenovo is the largest manufacturer of desktop computing devices and laptops, personal computing. They announced just maybe a few weeks ago, a month ago, that Q1 of 2013, they produced more touch-based devices than they did desktop and laptop devices. This is the first time that they saw that switch. So that happened in Q1. And there's lots of other data points out there I've been looking at that shows just an enormous trend and shift into touch-based devices. Some of the findings that we came out, and these are just a few tidbits that I pulled out of the data that we found when we did our one-on-one interviews. We went to a number of different universities. We interacted with lots of students. I will caveat that our research was done by only undergraduates in the United States. I did this presentation a few months back in Europe, and I wanted to make sure that that was very clear. So some of the findings, the first one I think is very common with any sort of web search system. Users start very broadly, very basic. They enter in a few key terms, and then they revise their search as they evaluate the search results. Also, at that point, after they've kind of felt a little bit more comfortable that they've got a good search term, that's when they start to interact with the filter options to narrow their results down. So they generally don't start to work with that early on. Something else that I think was really interesting to know about is how they kind of evaluate the search results. How do they know that their search terms are good, and what do they look at? First and foremost, for the snippets and the abstracts, they want to be able to read a little bit more about that item. They don't want to actually read the full thing yet, but they want to just get a little flavor. Is it the right thing that they're looking for? Another thing that we have in our tool is a subject term facet. So the ability for users to narrow their results by the 650s or keywords from journal articles, things like that. And they found that to be extremely confusing. They didn't understand what its purpose was, what it meant, what its value was. One user from one of our interviews said, why would I want to see a list of other people's search terms? So it was really kind of very confusing to them. But we had been experimenting with the ability to narrow the search results by a discipline. And when we showed that to them, they immediately connected with it. It made a lot of sense to them. Biology undergraduate, they immediately clicked on biology. It just really connected with them and made a lot of sense for them. So we've got a couple of short clips from some of our interviews. I hope this works. This has got audio, so I don't know if there's any audio problems. Anybody get audio to work? Well, they're really short, so it'll probably take longer to fix that than to actually. So I'll just tell you what she's talking about. When she's looking at the facets, she talks about information overload. And there's so many different options, and she doesn't know what to do. And as soon as she looks at it, she immediately gets overwhelmed and doesn't really even want to bother with it. Here is she's talking about, this is the same person. Shortly thereafter, she started talking about the search results. And she was looking at all of the different types of metadata elements that we show in the search results. And she was saying, I don't really care about who wrote it. I don't really care about the ISBN number or the ISSN number. All that stuff is useless to me. It's just getting in my way. And last but not least, this guy was a trip. He was talking about when you click on a search result, how it opens up in a new tab, and that he really liked that. which is different from Google. We kind of just assumed that, well, Google, it keeps everything in the same window. When you click on a result in Google, it stays in the same window. So why wouldn't everybody want to work that way? This student was like, oh, yeah, every time I click on a new article, it opens up in a new tab. Then I've got all my tabs. That's awesome. I love that. So we kept it. This is so we also had a number of clients that went out on their own and did usability reports that looked at Summon. So they did their own usability studies, they recruited their own students, they did their own tests and wrote a report. This, we were actually very fortunate with this report. This came from a graduate student at the University of Konstanz. She's in the Human-Computer Interaction department there. The library at the University of Konstanz, which is in southern Germany if you're not familiar, the library there asked the Human-Computer Interaction department if they would take this on as an evaluation, and they found a graduate student who was looking for a graduate thesis report. And so she decided to do her thesis on doing a usability study on Summon. She recruited students. She did the whole thing all on her own as a part of her project for a semester. So I actually had the opportunity to go to Germany and hear her present her thesis. It was all in German, so I didn't understand a word she was saying the whole time. And she also wrote her report all in German as well, which made no sense to me. But we had it translated into English. It's a 100-page report, and we've made it available if you want to take a look at it. It's a real long report. But what was really interesting, I pulled out this one snippet from it that I thought was really interesting about how users were criticizing when the application didn't meet their expectations. So this example hits on something very basic. We have in our product the ability to save an item. So as you're going through the search results, you can tag something that you like. And so the link to get to that list is in the lower right-hand corner. So how many people here shop online? Yeah, okay. And when you are online shopping, where is the shopping cart link located? Upper right. Every single site. We put it in the lower right. I have no idea why we did that, but we did that. And what this report was saying is that the users immediately criticized. They said, well, this makes no sense. Why is it in the lower right? Everywhere else, it's in the upper right to get to your saved items, right? So it's just some of those really simple, basic things that you're probably not even thinking about. By asking some of your users, you'll immediately find out you're making those really stupid mistakes that you didn't even really think about, that were just so basic and so very straightforward. So this is where I put my caveat, and I say, usability studies are great. It provides you with a wealth of information about your user experience. But it's wildly flawed in that as soon as you invite a user or recruit a user to come in and sit down with you and ask them all these questions, and you sit there breathing over their shoulder, and they immediately start to think and work differently than what they would if it was 2 o'clock in the morning in their dorm room, the paper's due the next day. They're immediately thinking differently. And so what you're really trying to address is those users who are working in their natural environment. And so the way we wanted to look at that as well is by doing big data analysis. So what we had amassed over 4 years of this tool being used, and because it's software as a service product, all of our users from around the world are using a single system. So we've been able to collect log data of all of our users from around the world into a single place. So we've got a tremendous amount of data. We've got search logs. We track outgoing clicks. So whenever a user clicks on something, we track that click, and we track a tremendous amount of metadata about that click. We've got web logs. We've got all sorts of log data that we can look at and correlate. And so that is really our view or our perspective into the real user, the unbiased user, what they're actually really doing live, and being able to begin to identify patterns and behaviors about how they're using this tool. And so this really takes us, outside of the ability of what we can do with a usability study. What we can now do is, if we analyze that big data, we can take our usability data and we can take the stuff that we've analyzed from our log data and bring that together and look at what that tells us by looking at the feedback from the users compared to what they're actually doing. So we did that by putting all of our data into an Elasticsearch index, and that gave us the ability to really start to crunch the numbers. So it's a tremendous amount of data. We've thrown it at an Elasticsearch index, and the reason why we use Elasticsearch are for a number of reasons. I've heard Elasticsearch a lot of times at this conference. I'm sure this isn't a new technology for you all. It provides some really great capabilities and allows us to do this data crunching. So from the time that I submitted the proposal for this talk to the time till today, we've actually canned Elasticsearch. We've canned it for a few reasons. One is when you're throwing that much data at an index, no matter how powerful the tool, when you're working with that much data, you need to have some people who are responsible for working with it, making sure that it's up to date, making sure that everything's running, making sure that everything's configured correctly. We had a sharding model, so you have to slice up the index, and so you have to calculate how you do that well, depending on the growth of your content. So it really required an engineer to work on it. And we've got some really fantastic engineers that work on search indexes. The problem is they're all focused on our massive solar index, and we didn't want to disrupt their focus on another index. And so what we decided to do, plus also the cost of buying all the hardware and all the costs associated with running all of that infrastructure internally, we quickly found that we should be putting all this data in the cloud and let the experts at Amazon, who know how to work with a lot bigger data than we have, handle all of that stress and all of that cost, and we'll just pay them per use data. And so we found that it was actually a lot cheaper for us to do that, a lot more effective for us to do that. So we started using Amazon's new Redshift product. Redshift is their gigantic database in the cloud. You can just throw data at it. You get something like gigabytes or terabytes of data for a very nominal cost. It's really dirt cheap when you look at it. And then it's based on usage. So if you're only using it to run reports on a monthly basis, it's pretty darn cheap. So it's something that you might want to take a look at if you're getting into the idea of doing some data analysis. Put it all in the cloud and let those guys worry about getting all the infrastructure right and getting all the databases tuned and worrying about all that. They do that all for you, and it's really, really cheap. When you look at some of the other commercial options like Oracle and all this other stuff, it's pennies on the dollar. So we've actually shifted, and we're in the process of rolling out Redshift. So now the fun part. So now I want to kind of show you some of the analysis that we did and some of the results that we came up with by crunching lots of different data points. So this one I think is fairly basic, but it tells a pretty cool story. This is the number of search terms used in a query. So you see a really sharp curve here. There's 1-word, 2-word queries at the top, 3-word queries about halfway down, then 4, 5, 6, and then there's just long tail. We stopped counting after about 75. Just kind of gave up at that point. Those are people just copying and pasting citations into the search box. So what I'm going to do is shift this into a logarithmic scale so you can kind of see it a little better. So I stretched it out, and you can kind of get an understanding that the vast majority of searching in our discovery platform is 3 words or less. Actually, 45% of searches are 3 words or less, and I drew a line there at the 50% mark. So if I put that line on the previous graph, you'd barely be able to see it because it would just be slightly off the y-axis. But I think this is really telling, and this kind of helps us define 2 main types of uses of discovery. There's the primary use, which is your 1 to 3 word query. These are very broad topical type searches. And then there's your second type, which is known item searching. Journal articles, book titles, just citation searching. That's really what we've kind of grouped up as to be the 2 primary ways of using discovery. So this has really kind of helped us set the stage as to the primary uses. So rather than looking at necessarily at personas, we can also look at, big data is telling us a story about how there's really, 2 primary uses. You could dive a little deeper and probably find a few other types of uses there. But there's really 2 primary uses that we want to be able to address and look at and make sure that we're doing really, really well for our users in these 2 primary scenarios. If anybody was at Code for Lib in Chicago last year, some of my colleagues at Serial Solutions, my engineering colleagues, did a presentation on their metrics. There's a number of different metrics that we use that looks at the quality of our search results. And they did a really nice report on that, and they also published a paper in the Code for Lib journal, maybe one of the last more recent issues, talks about all that. So if you're really interested in getting more deep into this, I would encourage you to take a look at that article on the Code for Lib journal. This is one of the metrics that we use out of a number of others. But this is the abandonment rate. Abandonment is fairly simple. If anybody's used Google Analytics, you're probably familiar with this. This basically means, did the user do anything once they got to the site or not? So the user ran a search. Did they click on anything or not is our abandonment rate. So that's what we track abandonment. You can see the one-word query has the highest level of abandonment. Not a shocker. And it really kind of fits in line with what you would expect, especially when looking at the way the reports from Google and other search tools have come out. It says, this is very common behavior for somebody to type in a search and then revise their search a few times before they actually click on anything. So it's not a real surprise to see this type of curve, to see the highest abandonment rate with the one word. But what I thought was most interesting here is that the one-word, two-word, and three-word queries have the highest level of abandonment. Yet that's also the highest or the most frequently used form of searching. So to me, that's not a problem. That is a big opportunity for us to group that as a common behavior and address that type of searching. And so that's something that we set out to do this year as well. So just a quick look at some of the top search terms that we see. One-word, two-word queries. The global warming one, you can ignore that. That's probably our sales team or our support team running test searches all day long, every day. And everybody just seems to, for some reason, use global warming as their test search. But you can kind of see just some of the idea of these one-word, two-word, three-word queries. Very broad, very topical. And this is really what users are searching on. And they're having the least level of success when they do that. When you look at the long tail form of searching, what I did is I just randomly selected queries out of our logs and grouped them together. So the first three are known item searching. Right? These are journal articles. Most likely had low abandonment. They type it in. They find the journal article. They clicked on it. And they went on their merry way. The second three are more subject term focused. So they're topical but much more granular. So you've got group therapy is maybe one term, Native American women, effectiveness. So obviously they're looking for correlation between the subject terms. Endocrinology, prolactin, highly scientific term. So while that is a 1 to 3 word keyword, it's also highly scientific. So that one's most likely going to have a lower abandonment. Childhood obesity, organic baby food. Now you'll notice that obesity was one of the top subject terms or search terms. So maybe I'm just guessing here. Maybe this user first typed in obesity, then they typed in childhood obesity, then they typed in childhood obesity, organic baby food, right? Because we know from our one-on-one interviews that users start very broadly. They just type in a term or two, see what they get, then modify and react and add in more terms. So that very well could have been a very plausible approach for that user. So some of the things that we had done just as we were doing this analysis is we added related searches to kind of help address those users. So I did a search on cognitive development, and we built a feature that allows the user to find related searches that have more terms in them so that we can kind of help shape the user's input. Now, I'm missing a slide here that I wanted to talk about. I wish I didn't skip that. There was I'm missing a slide from my presentation here, which looks at another result from Project Information Literacy. They did an infographic for the ACRL conference, and there was 3 statistics on that infographic. 66% of users that they studied said they had a real difficult time defining their topic. They studied 11,000 students in the United States. 66% were not able to well define their topic. 80% did not talk to a librarian for their research. And 82% used Wikipedia as a primary resource. Now, maybe they didn't cite it, but they used it as a major component of their research. So one of the things we know is that users are struggling to define their topic, and they're also entering in just a very few key terms. And so what we wanted to do out of that analysis is provide them a way to extend their query and get more granular. We also added in a best bets feature because we also saw a lot of things in these 1, 2, 3 word queries for things like library hours, for really random stuff not related to research. But libraries are adopting discovery as the main search box on their homepage. So a user goes to the library's website and sees a search box, and they think it works like Google. And so they type in things like library hours or, hopefully they're not typing in where do I find the bathroom, but things like that, right? And so we wanted to be able to provide results for the user that are not research related. If you had done a search on library hours, you'd probably find a newspaper article from some village somewhere about their library's hours that had changed for the holiday. And that's not useful at all to the user. So we wanted to give the ability to put some of those things at the top. This is a case at the National University of Singapore. They saw Singapore was one of their top search terms. So they created a little thing. If you're looking for Singapore, here's our guide to Singapore. Okay, so some more data points. Some of the other things that we looked at. How were filters used? And again, this really lines up with some of the ethnographic data that's out there. Again, we see that users kind of run a few searches and then they start to engage with the filters. Again, kind of following that mantra of search and refine. Still trying to find the value of this one and trying to correlate it to whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Still trying to make a little sense out of this. This is the number of queries per session. So obviously, a one query session is going to be your most common, and that's not a surprise. But then you see kind of this slow curve, not a sharp one. So I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. We're still trying to correlate that. Yes?
What constitutes a session in that particular? Is it the whole time a user is doing research, or is it a specific?
Good question. Good question. So we try to estimate. Oops. We try to estimate because we can't guarantee a session. We can't guarantee that the user session is ended. So we look at an inactivity of 20 minutes. And so when we see an inactivity of at least 20 minutes, we know that the session has kind of ended. So if you ran a search and then went to the bathroom, got a cup of coffee, came back, 20 minutes had gone by, ran a second search, to us that would be 2 sessions. So it's an estimation. It's not a science. This is also something that's interesting. Again, this came out of some of the work that we had been doing with our international client base, just to kind of get an understanding. And this is also in a logarithmic scale. If this graph was not in a logarithmic scale, you'd just see one bar for English and then a flat line. 93% of our users work in English, but we wanted to look at what other languages people are working in. Swedish is the number 2. Chinese, Spanish, Dutch, Korean, French, Japanese, Dutch, Turkish, Brazilian, Portuguese. So really the top 5 or 6 are the ones that we've been really looking at, and then it kind of slowly goes down from there. So that is the before, and this is your mandatory kitten photo. So that's the kind of the before picture. And so now what I wanted to do is just kind of walk you through what we've changed in our summon user experience and why specifically did that correlating to the data that we collected. So we can look at the after. So this is our facet panel as of our current summon design. Very wordy, and everything's very compact and close together. Lots of information for the user all at once. And this is something that we've known from our usability studies that causes information overload. And so we redesigned it with that data in mind. We decluttered it by really streamlining the number of words used per option. We put a lot of white space in between each option to not overwhelm the user with too many options. We switched the subject terms. We put that at the bottom, and we put discipline up at the top because that made a lot of sense to users. And we also took the numbers, the counts, out. What happens is when the user puts their cursor over that area, then the counts come back into play. But the idea was to minimize the amount of information we're displaying to the user when they first land on the page, because we knew that they were immediately becoming overwhelmed with the options and the data that we were presenting to them. So things that were not absolutely necessary at first glance, we removed. And like the counts, not necessary until you're really engaged in wanting to work with the facets. This is our search results as of the current design or the old design. One of the things you'll notice is that the metadata is not all lined up in a straight line, creates a zigzag effect. This actually came out of the report from the University of Constance. They used eyeball tracking software that actually tracks where the pupil is looking on the screen and helped us with this one. So this is the new design. We put all of the metadata all in a straight line. So you can kind of see the way the eye tracking goes. There's a zigzag effect that makes it harder for the user to scan the search results. We put all the metadata in a straight line so that they can just very easy scan through the search results. You'll notice that lots of sites out there do this. Facebook, Twitter, they're all you know, again, it's one of those things. Everybody else is doing it. It fits the expectations. It makes sense. How come we were causing the user to have to look all over the screen? This is what I was talking about before with the saved items feature. Had it in the lower right. We moved it to the upper right-hand corner in line with the way shopping carts work today. Something that I think is a little bit more of a risky change for us and something that we're experimenting with is we've gotten rid of the idea of paging. We originally, when Summon was first launched, we had the default was 25 results per page. We moved that to 10 results per page for two reasons. One, it made the system faster. Two, 90-some% of clicks were always in the top 10. So why give the user more than what they actually need? So we had moved it to 10, but then, you know, what happens if there's really something valuable at record 12? We know that users generally don't page. They generally don't click on page 2. It's just common behavior. They look at the top 10 results. If they don't see what they look, they modify their search terms. They don't go to page 2. So we switched away from that, and to also kind of fit in line with the idea of touch-based computing and common approaches to scrolling through content, and we moved to an infinite scroll. Now, there's also an article by Etsy, Etsy.com. They implemented infinite scroll for their environment, and they saw a drop-off in sales. They brought back the paging, and the sales came back up. So it didn't work for their user base. Now, maybe it's because they didn't implement it well, or who knows? They don't even know. They said that in their article. But they got rid of it. So we might end up finding the same thing. We might have to revert to that. Users just might not take to that. It's something that we're going to do some analysis on to kind of get an understanding. But it's kind of this idea of put something out there and try and collect your feedback and go on that. So that was our approach to that. And so we've got 5 minutes left, and this is my last slide. I just wanted to kind of show you what the full picture looked like. And that's the end of my talk. So we've got 5 minutes for questions, 4 minutes for 5 minutes for questions, or you can all have lunch early.
Do you have a link to a live setup of that you're showing us right now? Do you have a URL?
Yeah. We actually have a few clients that have already adopted our new design. University of Texas at San Antonio has it up and running. So if you go to their library homepage, you'll be working with the new Summon design. So if you want to take a look at it and play with it live, there's a lot of really cool new functionality that we built into it. Our topics on the right-hand side, we show topic information. We've got a query expansion technology that uses synonym mapping for users' input. Some really great things. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested. You can see it live at the UTSA website. All right, thank you.